Today marks 44 years since the release of Van Halen's Fair Warning. This album, by the time it was released, so much was happening with music in 1981. Many people ask me, they're like, how did you get started listening to metal? Mainly it was Van Halen. Van Halen was the main band that kind of bridged me over, and Def Leppard, early Def Leppard, Pyromania, High and Dry, On Through the Night, those albums really led me into the really hard rock, or the next wave of what I kind of felt like was a little bit of pop metal, a little happy metal, or whatever you want to call it. But Van Halen was truly the first one that I paid attention to, and I started to collect their cassettes early on. My first Van Halen cassette tape, I believe it was Women and Children First. Let me get into that. So when I was growing up, we lived in these apartments. I was probably about 6 years old, and I remember there was a kid who was probably somewhere around 12, maybe 14 at the oldest, but let's just say he was probably about 12, 13 years old. He invited me into his apartment, and he had like all these posters on the wall. He was a huge Rick James fan. So he was really big into Rick James. He was totally into hard rock. Not so much metal, but he did like Ozzy Osbourne. That was another one of the earlier ones that I did pay attention to and listen to, but we're gonna stick with Van Halen for now. But there were two bands that he was very big on that day he was mentioning to me. He had posters all over his wall. He's in there playing guitar, and he was like, man, do you listen to Van Halen? Do you listen to him? I'm a little kid, you know? So I'm like, no. And he's like, man, you gotta hear this stuff. So he's like playing all this Van Halen for me. I really wish I could remember that kid's name. Anyway, he starts talking about Eddie Van Halen and telling me like, this guy's the best guitarist in the world. And he's playing all this stuff for me. And then he starts talking about Rick James and Rick James's band, that Stone City Band or whatever they are, right? So he starts talking about all that. And that was really my true introduction to Van Halen that day. A couple more years go by, and I'm hanging out with this kid, and I remember his name. His name was David. He was 12 years old, and I was 9 at the time, and Van Halen came up again. He says, man, do you listen to Van Halen? Have you heard him? And by this time, MTV was around, and I was getting a lot of my influences, or a lot of the music I was getting into, I was getting it from MTV. Of course, I told him, yeah, I've heard of Van Halen. And he's like, man, have you heard Diver Down? So we went back to his apartment, and he starts playing Diver Down for me. He played some of Fair Warning, and he played another band. I'm really, the name is escaping me right now. But this guy, he was definitely into heavy metal. I think he may have been into Crocus or Venom, I think. But either way, he was into metal, but he was very careful about introducing me to some heavier metal for me. And like I said, I cannot, for whatever reason, I can't remember what all he played, but he played some heavy metal. I think he played some Iron Maiden, as a matter of fact. He did. He played some Iron Maiden for me, and he told me all these stories about the mascot Eddie. And he told me all these fictional stories about Eddie. And I guess he was trying to scare me a little bit. Some of it was working, but either way, he talked about Iron Maiden, but he kept talking about Van Halen. He's like, man, Eddie Van Halen is the best. Like, you gotta listen to him. A couple more years go by. 1984 is out. So Hot for Teacher and all that kind of stuff was out. I was over at my friend Donovan's house, and he had a drum set, and I was playing drums he had he had this super loud stereo system so he could play drums along with it. I had this knack for the drums, and I really enjoyed it. And I wanted to play drums. And I just remember hearing that opening drum rhythm for Hot for Teacher, and I was like, whoa, that's beyond my skill level for sure. But either way, I was like, man, this band, they were the bridge for me. They really were the bridge that led me to all the other metal or hard rock, which of course became metal or was disguised as metal in a way. Bands like Def Leppard, Motley Crue, Quiet Riot, Loudness. I didn't listen to a lot of Loudness, but I did like them. I thought they were pretty cool. A close friend of mine, he had their tapes, and he'd always play that stuff around me, so I can't claim Loudness, but I was hearing all this, what I believed was metal, and this led me into taking a deep dive or a deep look into metal by the age of 10. So by the age of 10, I was totally enamored with metal. But I was also enamored with all that new wave stuff. I was loving Duran Duran. I was loving The Police. I was loving In Excess. I was loving Prince. You know, I was loving all this music, but I was so fascinated with Van Halen and all these other bands that you could tell that they were influenced by Van Halen. And I was just totally enamored with his guitar playing. I went on and started picking up their cassettes. So anyway, by the 90s, the early 90s, I'd made a conscious effort to convert everything that I could from cassette to CD. I decided to leave cassettes behind. They were very problematic. I was having a lot of issues with them. So I picked up a bundle of CDs. If my memory serves me correctly, the very first CD I ever got was Information Society. Yes. It was a very weird mix. I got Information Society. I got Master of Puppets. Yes, I did. Like, all this stuff was happening at the same time. There were a few other CDs that I got. I remember they were like my first CDs. But this Fair Warning album, I'm pretty sure it was part of a Columbia House thing. I don't know if any of you guys remember or have ever heard of Columbia House. But anyway, they would make these advertisements. They're like, we'll give you 20 CDs for a penny or something crazy like that. And then, of course, you would get the bill and it would be this outrageous bill, and then you'd have to make some phone calls and get your parents involved to basically prevent having to pay these guys like $300 to $500 for, 20 or so CDs. I think the first shipment was like a dozen CDs, and this was among that shipment. In that shipment, I also got Bossa Nova from Pixies. They send you this box and you've got like all these really good albums in there. And anyway, this was among those albums. And I was so excited to get this because I had a new CD player. I had this car Walkman or Sony car Discman, that's right. And I remember listening to this as I was driving, and it had like all this shock protection and stuff. But yeah, I was really excited to get this album. For me, this album is like the catalyst to a lot of the metal, like the down tuning. Like I think a lot of it is in E flat. As far as Unchained goes, so from standard tuning, you want to tune a half step down, but on your E string, on the bass, it's your 4th string, or on the guitar, it's your 6th string. You want to tune that down to C sharp. You want to drop it to C sharp instead of drop D. And that's how you get this tune. Those down tunings, it was just gave it a heavier feel, heavier sound, you know? I'm going to have a little fun with the flanger here. That's it. I mean, of course, there's the, there's a few little things here and there, but he keeps it really simple. There's no need to get busy because Eddie's getting busy. So he's just holding it down and he's locking in with Alex. And that's what sounds so great about that song. It's so heavy. I would easily say that is hands down Van Halen's heaviest song, in my opinion. That's what I mean when I say that song is like the catalyst to a lot of like the drop tuning, heavy stuff, all the metal stuff that's tuned to half step down or whatever it may be. They weren't the first to do it, of course. But in that world of popular hard rock verging on metal, that was really, really heavy for its time. And I remember just seeing the video on MTV for Unchained, and it was just mind-blowing. Like, I was just like, wow, this is real Van Halen, right? After this, I kept listening to Van Halen. So when Van Halen became Van Hagar, I was still super excited because I was a Sammy Hagar fan as well. So I had no problem with him joining the band. And still David Lee Roth had his solo thing going. So I felt like, I was getting the best of both worlds, no pun intended. Either way, I just didn't want to let this day go by without celebrating the release of this album. Without this album, I wouldn't have gotten into Iron Maiden. I wouldn't have gotten into Def Leppard. I wouldn't have gotten into Quiet Riot. I wouldn't have gotten into Metallica. I wouldn't have gotten into Testament. I wouldn't have gotten into Sepultura. You see where I'm going? Like, even though these guys were like metal with a smile or hard rock with a smile, they were like good time party stuff, they were really, really good. And I also want to say something about Michael Anthony. Like, push comes to shove, he definitely shows you that he's got skills and he's got a lot of taste and he's got a lot of groove, he's got a lot of flavor. It's very important to note that he knew where he was needed. I'm sure he had internal influences as far as Eddie Van Halen telling him, hey, don't do this there. But that is the example. That's what it means to play good, solid rock bass. Michael Anthony is like the king of solid rock bass. There is nothing wrong with... I think that's a drop tuning as well, but either way, this guy, he could play. He could do some awesome stuff, but he always held it down. He held it down so well. That rhythm section, those guys, they rocked day in, day out, every night. In my opinion, he set a really good example for a lot of bass players that followed him. I was watching a video the other day, and I think it was the bass player, I might be getting this wrong, but I think it was the bass player who played with Vertical Horizon or something. But anyway, this guy was going through his songs. That is bass playing, really. Like, it's not always about showing what you can do and showing all your best stuff. It's about just putting the bass where it fits the song, serving the song and not your ego. That is Michael Anthony. The guy has balls. He's got great tone, and I love all the bass work on all the Van Halen. Even if he's just sitting there, just let me get that flanger off. I think that's in the wrong key, but either way. And then, like I said, this guy is like the 16th note master. Got a lot of respect for him, definitely. He's an influence of mine. I love him. Please, I would love to know, where were you or what influenced you to listen to Van Halen? If you are a Van Halen fan, I would love to have a conversation with you guys about where you were or at what point in your life did you discover Van Halen, what got you into him, what song was it? Please let me know in the comments. We can all have a conversation about it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll have another video out to you soon.